Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another interview here at Skyscraper. I'm Brian Garrett Glazer, managing editor for eVTOL.com, and I am thrilled today to be speaking with Simon Briceno. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Simon Briceno, Chief Commercial Officer with Jaunt's Air Mobility. Simon, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Great to speak with you, Brian.
You know, I think as a good place to start, I was looking back at the press release surrounding your joining Jaunt earlier this year, I think in March, and you mentioned a number of reasons why you chose to join Jaunt, with, of course, a number of other fascinating and well-funded companies out there as well. Part of it was due to the vehicle design, the characteristics of the journey, but also you mentioned that you chose to join the company because Jaunt intends to be very involved in building out the other elements of the UAM ecosystem beyond the vehicle. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. I'll give you a little bit of a background as far as the decisions that I made regarding joining Jaunt. Prior to Jaunt, I was working at Georgia Tech in the aerospace department as a research faculty, and I spent many years, about a decade or so, investigating and studying the various aircraft configurations, and specifically those VTOL aircraft and the enabling technologies like distributed electric propulsion, energy storage, electric motors, autonomy as well. And progressively, not just the aircraft, but the types of missions that these aircraft can perform, and the markets. And as we quickly found over the last 5 to 7 years, is that with the increasing energy storage technology and a lot of these other enablers, we found that quite a lot of interesting markets opened up. And so really it became a matter of, from an aircraft standpoint, what was the best configuration that not only gave you that efficiency, that environmentally friendliness, whether it's noise or other factors, but also which one was well positioned to get to operation, to be able to enter the market and enter into service. And so quite a lot of other factors, primarily, the certification process and the existing framework that authorities have, both FAA, EASA, Transport Canada, ANAC as well. What was out there that really allowed us to be able to develop a certification basis and get our aircraft in a timely manner through the certification. So it was both a combination of the design of the aircraft, being able to have some certainty that we would be able to put this into operation. And then, in all honesty, what really put me sort of convinced me that Jaunt was the right choice is the team. And I do believe heavily in making sure that the right people are part of companies, especially when you're thinking about a startup and you're thinking about launching an aircraft development program. That's quite a huge undertaking. You want to make sure that you have the individuals that are well positioned to make it a success. And so for me, our CEO, Martin Perrier, and his background, and then our other individuals working in this company that have a tremendous amount of experience both in industry and in the military, really convinced me that this was the right team to make sure that the aircraft and the design that we had was going to be a success in the market. Our strategy has always been, as an OEM, to have this aircraft, designed, certified, produced for our customers, their operators, and we strongly believe that, just like you see in today's aviation industry, when you put an aircraft into service, there are a host of factors that play into ensuring that that aircraft is going to be a viable solution for the operator from a business standpoint. And you have to think about things like MRO, you have to think about things like infrastructure, and this eVTOL space really adds a additional layer of complexity, which is the fact that, we are all electric aircraft and will require quite a bit of electrification infrastructure. And then you start thinking about, some of the ConOps, the operations for these markets, and you have, potentially low altitude, a lot of aircraft flying in low altitude, congested airspace, and the airspace itself, the architecture and the air traffic management systems, have to be, in place for that to happen safely. And so, the ecosystem, as we call it, is obviously critical. And the reason that Jaunt, really got into ensuring that these critical ecosystem aspects were addressed is because we have an aircraft and we know that it's contingent upon having those ecosystem elements in place for us to have a solid, reliable, safe, efficient, operational model. And
Right.
so we began to work with other partners. We believe in collaboration, just like we do on our aircraft. We have an aircraft that we have a partnership with several suppliers that have experience, a lot of pedigree in the aviation industry. And likewise, for the ecosystem, we believe that working with the experts that know about electrification, about infrastructure, about aircraft supportability, MRO, that we would be able to work with them and provide them requirements. They can push back, et cetera, and we would be able to then provide a holistic solution to our customer.
So let's talk about that, because Jaunt recently announced the formation of this thing called Access Skyways with Price Systems and PS&S. PS&S being an architecture and engineering firm, and Price Systems, a cost evaluation analysis firm, is my understanding. And I've talked to them; they're great people. And my understanding is that other partners will be joining at some point as well, and potentially other vehicle partners as well, is what your communications folks told me a couple of weeks ago. But this is interesting to me as a journalist, because I look at this and I see, okay, Jaunt is, and here is my cat Onyx here to get involved in the interview process. I don't know if she has much to contribute or not, but if I can fix my camera here, my understanding as a journalist looking at this, Jaunt is both an Uber Elevate vehicle partner, and with the launch of Access Skyways, it seems to me, simultaneously sort of creating a separate ecosystem of its own with partners outside of the Uber Elevate system. Is that an accurate way to describe this, or how would you put Jaunt's both participating in what Uber is trying to build and creating Access Skyways? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not meant to be an equivalent ecosystem that Uber Elevate is creating. We are really just focused on certain aspects of that ecosystem. In other words, that take a long time to establish, like infrastructure and the electrification aspects of that infrastructure. And so it's complementary. We are working with companies that are already working with Uber Elevate, like PS&S and Price and a few others that I can't name just yet. And so what we're really focused on, this Access Skyways is just the name of this group of companies, and that's all it is. It's meant to just say, hey, look, we are working together to really address some very difficult technical and non-technical barriers. And in the cities that Uber Elevate is not currently planning to launch, so outside of their launch cities, there are some very real questions by potential operators there about how this concept of urban air mobility will work. And so we need to bring in the right people to be able to help us answer those questions. They typically have the form of, where are they going to take off and land? How many are we going to see? What are the economics around these types of operations? How do they connect with existing mass transit options for people? And so, and we're talking here the air taxi. There's obviously equivalent, cargo related questions. And so we really are focused on those aspects of the ecosystem. We're not, the airspace, for instance, the air traffic management of the future. That's a huge initiative that is being tackled by mostly government here in the U.S. with NASA's national campaign, with other industry service providers. And, we're involved in that, but that's also another collaborative effort.
Yeah. So is part of this about being able to provide, baseline sort of requirements from the vehicle perspective as well, to, regulators, to people that want to develop infrastructure, being able to say, here's what the potential aircraft is going to look like, and therefore here's what the requirements are, and that'll help speed along the sort of chicken and egg problem of how do we develop infrastructure if we don't know what the vehicle will look like? Is that part of what this is?
That's exactly what it is. You hit the nail on the head with requirements. We, as an aircraft manufacturer, we have a technology, and we know what our mission, performance, payload, range capabilities are. And so we can directly provide the requirements of the aircraft to the in some cases working with Price on developing an operational model that has the economics, right? And so we can determine, with them, and then of course bringing in some of the infrastructure constraints from, if it's at a specific city, utility providers and other working with other transportation agencies. They can say, here are your constraints, working with PS&S on some of the design aspects of the infrastructure. And so what we're trying to do is converge on, again, a solution that isn't just looking at the aircraft, isn't just looking at the infrastructure. It's really trying to find a feasible way of implementing this type of operation. And there's, dozens of cities around the world that are wanting to understand that connectivity, that interface between these different areas. And we feel that by working together, and we have to, right? It's an integrated challenge, integration challenge. And that's the same that we're doing with Verone vehicles. And we're hoping that, and it takes time to work together to exchange information, requirements. And so that's exactly what we're attempting with this group.
Understood. So I want to get back to Verone vehicles and John's involvement in Latin America in a little bit, but first let me ask. So you kind of mentioned some of the areas where you do hope to be involved or are involved, and that includes infrastructure and airspace, I guess, understanding of the airspace construction, but there are bounds there. You're not trying to build, the airspace traffic management system, right? So could you help me better understand what the bounds on that ecosystem involvement are? Where does Jaunt see itself involved, and where is Jaunt saying, okay, we're not doing everything. We're not trying to involve ourselves in every aspect of this. We're not going to do that.
Right. So you mentioned the airspace. That's exactly right. Our strategy is to provide a platform, an aircraft that can follow existing airspace rules. So, for instance, Part 135 rules. We're designing our aircraft with the systems for single pilot IFR operations. And so that is assuming that the airspace construct is not going to change drastically over the next 5 to 10 years. And so we have to, from day one, from today, build and design an aircraft with its onboard systems to be able to enter service in today's airspace. And of course, as the design of the airspace evolves, we will certainly work with our suppliers to update and upgrade, just like other aircraft do in today's aviation industry, to ensure that they are following the requirements from the airspace and air traffic management here in the U.S. and across the world. So that's one where we are just following what is required by us to make sure that we can legally operate in the airspace. And then the other areas that we do, I would say that we do not get involved in at this point is anything, and for instance, the Uber Elevate team providing the platforms from a customer standpoint, being able to manage the ride sharing and the flow of passenger demand. Those are elements that we are going to leave to other service providers like
Okay.
and others, exactly, because that's a whole area of operation that at this point we are not focused on. The reason, again, that we are collaborating and now publicly mentioning these companies is because they are focused on elements that are very directly tied to our aircraft from a business standpoint. We can't put out an aircraft and an all-electric aircraft if the infrastructure is not available to operate that aircraft. So it's in our best interest to ensure that we know that it'll be in place, that those pieces will be there, that the charging capabilities will be there. That does not mean that we're going to develop any of that. In fact, it's not the case. What it means is that we are going to work together to exchange requirements and information so that the right equipment is available to us when we deliver our aircraft.
Okay, understood. So that makes a lot of sense. So what you're saying is that the involvement in other elements of the ecosystem is really, for John, it's limited to the elements of the ecosystem that are directly tied to the aircraft. And so it's, in a way, the provision of that aircraft to operators is going to be dependent on making sure, like you said, the infrastructure, the airspace are set up and ready in a way where they're there to accommodate the journey and allow those services.
That's absolutely correct. And if you look at our website, I showed that infographic of some of those critical elements. You'll notice that they are heavily focused on infrastructure, electrification, maintenance and repair, things that are very intimately tied to the aircraft. And we leave out a lot of the ecosystem aspects to other experts to develop.
That makes sense. I think that's smart. I was looking at some of the presentation that you provided for the Skyscraper event, and there's mention of the entire door-to-door journey process from home to destination or vice versa, and that includes a lot of multimodal transfers and stuff that is really difficult. I think really complicated, and I think a lot of players in this space underestimate how difficult it is to get that element of it right, and how important it will be to ensuring that there's margins, both in terms of economics and making money off this, but also saving people time. And so I think it makes sense to say, okay, that's an area, for example, where John is saying someone else is going to solve that problem. We're going to
absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, Brian, because I did show that, and if hopefully there's recordings of all these presentations that we give. That one slide is really meant for those that are new to this idea of urban air mobility. I just wanted to give them in the context, and Uber Elevate, for instance, does a fantastic job of doing this, is to kind of think about what that journey would look like for a passenger. And so that's where I went sort of the door-to-door, from the booking process all the way through having a seamless, experience at the vertiport and then on the aircraft and then back again to their destination. That was meant to really give, hopefully, viewers an understanding of what in sort of a day in the life of a customer, what of a passenger, what would that look like. And I just do want to make it clear that there's a lot of work, technology, software that has to be in place for that to happen. And John is relying on others to provide those connectivity platforms. We are just providing the aircraft.
Absolutely. So let's then talk about your work with Verone Vehicles and in Latin America. What can you tell us about what Jaunt has been up to date on the continent and with Verone Vehicles and future plans?
Yeah, so this is a very exciting. I want to start by saying, that again, I personally have a connection with Latin America. I'm originally from South America, Venezuela and Colombia. And, I met Felipe and Verone Vehicle team this year, and they've been working extremely hard to identify and understand, the value and the potential that Latin American cities and urban areas have when it comes to urban air mobility. And there's quite a lot of value in that. We have over the last several years looked at Asia, we've looked at Europe, here in North America as well. Every city around the world certainly has its attributes and advantages, and lends itself in many ways to a new transportation mode, like urban air mobility. We've seen in Brazil, for instance, in Sao Paulo, some of that already happening in many ways. Colombia has a tremendous amount of potential. And the Verone team has really done a fantastic job on the ecosystem side to bring together those stakeholders. And that's really where we saw, again, a great opportunity, a complementary relationship here, where we have an aircraft and we're focused on providing a vehicle solution to this urban air mobility ecosystem. And wherever it might be around the world. And so, very few groups like Verone have really taken an initiative to bring together a full set of ecosystem stakeholders to the table to really start to think about, again, exchanging requirements, exchanging information, to see how we can converge on an operational solution, not just in one future where we see air taxis, for instance, over Bogota in Colombia or somewhere else, but how do we get there, and the scaling, and as Verone, mentions the crawl, walk, run approach. I think that's really the challenge. Is we know the technology's there, the aircraft, some are already flying. How do we get it into service? And I think Verone has done a fantastic job of starting to lay out that roadmap.
Well, let me ask you that very question then. Tell me more about that. What does that roadmap look like of getting from, because I think, we've talked about, and Felipe and other people have talked about, air taxis are one of the applications here, and they're probably one of the later stage applications here because it's a very complicated airspace to deal with. So what are the maybe initial applications that we're going to see in Latin America of these new vehicles, and what's the roadmap to getting to that more mature system?
Yeah, so those details I'll leave to Verone, but I will say in our discussions and collaboration and partnership with Verone, we really see the initial sort of crawl phase as helping to educate the public. We all know, and this is not just in Latin America, but across the world, public acceptance is just really going to be a priority. Number one, in terms of not just from a perception standpoint of safety or things like that, but from a business standpoint, we need to have people want to fly these aircraft and generate that demand and ensure that it's an economic success. And so that first phase of working with the local, city communities, and again, Verone is doing this in cities in Colombia, in the coast, in Cartagena. And we feel that there's a process that has to first be, followed, where we do some flight demonstrations. You know, we work with Verone to really show how this aircraft will work in reality. We know we have a piloted technology demonstrator right now that we've flown over the last 10 years that has the very similar main rotor technology we call the ROSA, reduced operating speed aircraft technology, and that is a technology demonstrator, the JTD that we hope to use as a testing platform and as a demonstration platform over the next few years. We have our pre-production aircraft that it will be flying in 2 years, in 2023. And we hope to, again, use that. It's primarily actually as part of our development and certification program, but we will use that as a technology demonstrator as well in places like Cartagena and across the world to really help educate the public about how that, and that's again what the video that Verone has produced with us, showing how that aircraft will fly around these cities, how it will take advantage of the airspace architectures and air traffic management system that the Verone has also began to develop. And so there's quite a lot of integration that has to happen, and not just from a technical standpoint, but from a letting the public understand that it's not just an aircraft that's taking off and going from point A to point B, but that it's working and it's providing a benefit and value to that city. If it's air taxi, it's helping people move around faster, more efficiently, and much more environmentally friendly. If it's cargo, it's also an efficient way to move packages and cargo. And so that roadmap, as I said early on, is through flight demonstrations and then working out some of the kinks in the integration of the airspace design that is certainly very unique to Verone vehicles in Colombia. And, you know, and then eventually we're going to progress to the walk phase and then the run phase where there may be actual air taxi operations at scale.
You know, the one other question I wanted to ask you, Simon, about the introduction of air taxis or other applications of eVTOLs in Latin America. You know, I know that people talk about how there's quite an active helicopter, you know, air taxi or charter sector in Sao Paulo and other cities across the continent. Are you concerned at all that the introduction of these vehicles and making it a little bit easier, a little bit cheaper for people to access this type of flight will exacerbate societal divisions? Or how do you see this playing out in terms of social impact? And maybe this is more of a tourism thing first?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. I think that, you know, it's very difficult to sort of project or forecast what societal impact it will have, whether it's positive and negative. It's this early in terms of having a full-scale, you know, air taxi operation in many of these cities. As you pointed out, we already know that there is demand just by using helicopters in many of these Latin American cities to move around. So we'll have to see, you know, down the road again in that sort of run phase, once we start really seeing air taxi type operations, some of these emerging Latin American cities, you know, who the riders are, who the passengers are, what kind of demand. I do not believe it's going to have any kind of negative impact. It's going to provide just another mode of transportation, and it's going to complement existing transportation. But what we do know is that early on, as I mentioned, with the public acceptance, we do know there is a thriving tourism industry around the world, but in particular in Latin America and Colombia. And that's why we believe, you know, with Verone vehicles, Cartagena is a great place to start, not just that education or that information process of helping folks understand how this might work, but it's a unique market, the tourism market, where, it's not this full-fledged air taxi scheduled operations of it's moving people, real people, passengers, giving them an opportunity to feel and understand the aircraft. Our aircraft, very similar to aircraft you see today from a comfort standpoint. And so that's going to be an important initial market. We have to see what the business and economics, how that rolls out. But again, you want to convince the public that this is a viable and mode of transportation. And we really see that at least starting in Cartagena with the tourism side.
Right. So that's one of those early applications, early markets that helps get to the more mature ecosystem where I think the cost will come down more and it'll be more of a globally used asset.
Exactly. And let me just add that, another one is the cargo. We see that across the world now, and that's another one where we know the economics are there, and it will allow operators to build time on those aircraft to really understand how all the ConOps are working, and then progressively transition to air tax. It's just another roadmap. It's not necessarily the only one, but it does give, again, the ability for the public to understand, digest what's going on over time, and be willing to eventually use that as a service.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much to Simon Briceno, to you for joining us, and thank you everyone watching. I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to Verone Vehicles for having us.